I did not dismantle this spy network to shock the world. Ibrahim Traoré said, his voice steady, his eyes locked on the camera. I did it because no nation can call itself free if every word spoken, every ounce of gold, every stream of data flows into someone else's hands.
This was not a routine statement. It was a declaration of war against an order that had stood for more than 15 years, hidden inside telecom contracts, mining projects, and humanitarian aid programs that looked harmless on paper. A network so sophisticated that most never believed it existed until Burkina Faso crushed it in a single night. This is not just the story of a small West African nation. It is a question for an entire continent, and for anyone who has ever thought independence was nothing more than a flag and an anthem. If you still believe that justice is not for one nation alone, if you want to hear what Africa News will never dare to fully tell, stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change how you see power, how you define freedom, and how you understand the future of Africa. Long before the morning raids of May 17, 2024, before the name Ibrahim Traoré trended across Africa, news feeds the stage for this confrontation had been set. It began decades earlier when much of Africa's communications, mining, and security infrastructure was not built to serve the people, but to serve those who extracted from them. In the colonial era, telegraph lines didn't connect villages, they connected mines to ports. Railroads weren't mapped to unite people, they were mapped to move resources out faster. And in the modern age, the design has barely changed, only the tools have. Fiber optic cables, cell towers, satellite links. The promises are always the same: development, connectivity, security. But behind the promises lies the same principle: control the information, and you control the nation. For over 15 years, a covert intelligence architecture quietly expanded across Africa. It wore the mask of investment and aid, offering free internet expansion in exchange for infrastructure contracts, cybersecurity partnerships in exchange for access to national data systems, and counterterrorism cooperation in exchange for a foothold inside the country's decision-making core. Burkina Faso was just one of many nations touched by this web. But unlike most, it had a leader willing to confront it head-on. Traoré inherited a nation surrounded by instability, insurgent attacks in the north, economic stagnation, and a political class long conditioned to work within the limits set by foreign interests. He understood something vital: the battle was not simply about soldiers and borders. It was about sovereignty over data, over contracts, over the invisible pipelines that carried the lifeblood of the nation out of sight. In the 1960s, Americans learned this lesson through the exposure of COINTELPRO when they discovered their own government was secretly infiltrating civil rights movements. For Burkina Faso in 2024, the shock was similar: a realization that the nation's enemies did not always come with armies, but sometimes with briefcases and signed agreements. By the time Traoré received the 400-page report from Burkina Faso's Counterintelligence Bureau, he knew this was not just a policy issue, it was survival. The decision ahead would either keep the country on its knees or set a precedent that could ripple across an entire continent. It began with a detail so small, most leaders would have missed it: a $200 million telecommunications contract quietly signed between a neutral company and Burkina Faso's Ministry of the Interior. On the surface, it was about expanding mobile coverage and providing high-speed internet to rural areas. It was the sort of deal that earns polite applause in donor conferences. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't just see the signature, he saw the fine print. Acting on a hunch, he ordered a full investigation. What his intelligence team uncovered was staggering: every month, over 3 terabytes of personal data security files and detailed mineral maps were being funneled to servers in Tel Aviv. This was not one company. It was 6 together, controlling nearly 70% of Burkina Faso's military communications and economic network infrastructure. The operation had been running for 15 years. The report on Traoré's desk was 400 pages long. The first page was enough to confirm it. This was an espionage machine built in layers, each hidden under a different mask. Layer 1 technical infrastructure. Companies like Westel Africa had installed transmission towers across 18 provinces, advertised as free internet expansion. Hidden inside were interception devices capable of recording phone calls and text messages. In 2023 alone, over 48 million phone calls and 122 million text messages were copied, encrypted, and sent to a military analysis center in Herzliya, Israel. Layer 2 economic infiltration. In 2018, an Israeli investment fund signed a $1.4 billion agreement to develop mining infrastructure and cybersecurity. A clause never made public granted technical experts unrestricted access to Burkina Faso's national resource management systems. As a result, the Anata gold mine alone was overexploited by 60%, with $250 million worth of gold disappearing each year. Layer 3 political interference. Israeli-backed NGOs and research institutes quietly financed opposition groups, fueling ethnic and religious divisions. Between 2020 and 2023, at least 18 disinformation campaigns smeared the Burkinabe government and incited violent protests. Traoré's mind went back to August 2022, when a convoy carrying uranium ore was ambushed in the north. The exact route and timing had been known only to top officials. Now he knew why. From 2015 to 2023, Burkina Faso lost an estimated $3.8 billion to over-extraction, tax evasion, and price manipulation. In the Sahel, communities that once lived side by side now clashed over rumors, false reports claiming one group had been given mining priority while the other was abandoned. Those rumors traced back to the very network he was now confronting. This was no accident. It was deliberate. It was slow-motion warfare. The strike, on May 17, 2024, at 7:15 a.m., 14 military trucks rolled into downtown Ouagadougou, surrounding Westel Africa's headquarters. Soldiers stormed the building, seizing 320 hard drives, 210 servers, and every encrypted communications device in sight. Initial analysis revealed that a detailed map of Burkina Faso's military positions had been sent abroad just 48 hours earlier. At the same time, special forces hit Africa Resource Analytics in the south, officially a mining consultancy, but in reality, a branch of an Israeli defense conglomerate. Inside, they found 1.7 terabytes of resource data, including undisclosed oil reserves in the Gao region, valued at $8 billion. By 9:30 a.m., 6 more locations were raided: NGO offices, data centers, front companies. 40 foreign employees were detained, 11 carrying Israeli passports. Satellite communications equipment was sealed on the spot. That afternoon, Ibrahim Traoré appeared on national television. The images of him in his beret, flanked by senior officers, flashed across Africa news broadcasts and social media feeds. Today, we have severed the tentacles choking the throat of Burkina Faso. No nation, no matter how rich or powerful, has the right to turn our homeland into a chessboard for their power games. Those who conspire in the shadows to betray our people will pay the price. The reaction was electric. In Mali, President Assimi Goïta ordered a suspension of all defense technology contracts with Israeli partners. In Guinea, the Ministry of Communications shut down 2 Israeli-backed cybersecurity firms. Niger launched an investigation into all foreign-linked telecom projects. The message was clear. No one wanted to be the second Burkina Faso. But in Tel Aviv, the mood was grim. On May 18th at 5:00 a.m., local time, Benjamin Netanyahu convened an emergency meeting with the Mossad director, the Minister of Defense, and senior advisors. A map on the wall showed 9 African nations now reviewing or dismantling Israeli-funded infrastructure. Projected losses $3 billion within 6 months, if the trend continued. One advisor's warning echoed through the room. He's not just defending Burkina Faso. Traoré is building a wall around all of West Africa, and if this stands, it will be a deadly precedent. The first major battle had been won, but the war for sovereignty was only beginning. The morning after the raids, the streets of Ouagadougou buzzed with a mix of disbelief and pride. People gathered around cafe televisions, radios crackled in open-air markets, and cell phones lit up with footage of soldiers escorting foreign executives into armored trucks. The images spread faster than any press release. Burkina soldiers in desert camouflage loading sealed crates marked evidence onto military transports. Satellite dishes, draped in plastic server racks, rolled out like captured weapons of war. By midday, those images had crossed borders. In Bamako, Conakry, and Niamey, the question whispered in ministries and barracks was the same. If Burkina Faso can do this, why can't we? This was not just a domestic operation. It was a continental statement. The network that Ibrahim Traoré had exposed wasn't unique to his nation. It was a blueprint repeated across Africa. Telecom infrastructure doubling as listening posts, mining contracts, as keys to national resource data, humanitarian aid programs, as gateways into political circles. And now, one leader had torn off the mask in front of the whole world. The domino effect. Within 24 hours, Mali suspended every defense technology contract involving Israeli companies pending review. Guinea's Ministry of Communications shut down 2 Israeli-backed cybersecurity firms. Niger launched an investigation into all foreign-linked telecom projects. This was not random. It was coordinated inspiration. The phrase, "no one wants to be." The second Burkina Faso began circulating across Africa news platforms. In Tel Aviv, panic took hold. On May 18th at 5:00 a.m., Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened an emergency meeting with the Mossad director, the Minister of Defense, and senior national security advisors. The mood was described by one source as dense enough to cut with a knife. On the wall, a map of Africa glowed red with markers 9 nations now actively reviewing or dismantling Israeli-funded infrastructure. Projected losses $3 billion within 6 months if the trend continued. One advisor broke the silence. He's not just defending Burkina Faso. Traoré is building a wall around all of West Africa. And if it holds, it will be a precedent we cannot afford. Shockwaves in the West. In Paris, President Emmanuel Macron phoned Netanyahu directly offering cooperation to stabilize the situation. In Washington, the State Department released a carefully worded statement, urging Burkina Faso to honor its international cooperation commitments. But privately, American officials worried about something deeper. What if Traoré's doctrine spread not just to security contracts, but to mining, energy, and finance? The counter-narrative begins. On May 20th, pro-Israel media outlets launched a coordinated offensive. Headlines labeled Ibrahim Traoré as an emerging dictator, accused him of destabilizing the region, and painted his alliances with Mali and Guinea as signs of anti-Western radicalism. The goal was clear: isolate Burkina Faso diplomatically and erode Traoré's domestic support. But the narrative faltered online. African social media users countered with the hashtag Mali Traoré for Africa, pushing images of the May 17th raids and calling the date Sovereignty Day. Within 48 hours, the hashtag had trended in 14 countries. A wall of trust. For Traoré, the real victory wasn't the servers seized or the contracts voided. It was the trust built in the process. The people had watched him not only confront a foreign intelligence network, but do it openly, without hiding the scale of infiltration or the risks of retaliation. That transparency became his shield. And the shield would be tested almost immediately, behind closed doors in Tel Aviv. According to a source later quoted in Haaretz, Netanyahu listened in silence as his advisors explained the scope of the damage. He asked one question: can we stop him before others follow? The answer was uncertain. By the time his orders came, activate every channel at any cost, the momentum in Africa had already shifted. For decades, foreign powers had relied on secrecy, plausible deniability, and the quiet complicity of local elites. May 17th had cracked that foundation. The wall Traoré was building wasn't made of soldiers or steel. It was built from public awareness, and that was something no intelligence agency could penetrate. The first act of the story was complete. The mask had been ripped away, the truth laid bare. But the moment a predator is cornered, it becomes most dangerous. And somewhere far from the streets celebrating in Ouagadougou, the next move was already being planned. What happened next would prove that exposing the truth is one thing, surviving the counterattack is another. In the early hours of May 22, 2024, just 5 days after the May 17 raids, the fight moved into a darker phase. Across Burkina Faso, power grids flickered and died. 11 provinces were plunged into blackout. Banks froze, telecommunications stalled, and in the capital, Ouagadougou, traffic lights went dark, turning intersections into chaos. To the untrained eye, it looked like a nationwide technical failure. But inside the Counterintelligence Bureau, investigators already knew better. This was the opening salvo of a covert campaign the Israelis called Operation Blackheart. The plan was as old as empire itself: destabilize the target from within, turn its own people against it, and then call it a failed state. Step 1. Infrastructure sabotage. Engineers once contracted by West Africa had embedded malicious code inside Burkina Faso's national power control system. With a single remote trigger from abroad, the central command was disabled, forcing entire regions into darkness. Step 2. Fueling violence. Almost overnight, local armed groups began receiving shipments of new rifles and ammunition, delivered through smuggling routes across the Niger border. Intelligence traced some of these weapons back to a Middle Eastern military depot. Cash payments flowed in through couriers, bypassing the banking system entirely. Step 3. Information warfare. Hundreds of anonymous social media accounts sprang to life claiming Ibrahim Traoré had secretly sold uranium mines to an Asian power, cut off medical aid, and left children to starve. The posts appeared simultaneously on Facebook X and Telegram, an obvious sign of coordinated programming, the SHIELD plan. But what Africa News headlines wouldn't say was that Traoré had anticipated this. Before May 17th, he had crafted what his inner circle called the SHIELD plan. On May 23rd, flanked by his Minister of Energy, Traoré went live on national television. He didn't just deny the allegations, he showed proof screenshots of malicious code, intercepted emails between engineers and a Tel Aviv server address, even internal West Africa communications discussing grid disruption contingencies. They do not just want our gold, he said firmly. They want us on our knees in the dark. But we do not fear the dark. That same day, military technicians began replacing the compromised power control system with a temporary domestic alternative. Electricity was restored in 48 hours faster than any foreign consultant believed possible, cutting off the lifeline. Border patrols tightened. At the eastern checkpoint, soldiers intercepted a convoy carrying 400 assault rifles and 60,000 rounds of ammunition. State TV broadcast the crates' serial numbers, matching them to inventory from the Middle East. Transparency as a weapon. Then came the most radical move. Traoré ordered the entire national financial ledger published online, inviting any citizen to verify that no uranium sale had ever occurred. His media advisor summed it up in one line: light kills lies. The result was immediate. Public trust soared. A University of Ouagadougou poll on May 28th showed 91% of citizens supported Traoré's hardline stance against foreign interference. Ripple across borders. Benin announced a review of all Middle Eastern-funded technology projects. Togo suspended contracts with an Israeli-backed data mining firm. The counterattack had not broken Burkina Faso's resolve, it had amplified it. But in Tel Aviv, the message was different. Netanyahu's advisors argued that Blackheart had revealed another vulnerability: infiltration from within. A leaked internal note read, "If you cannot break the wall from the outside, chisel it from the inside." That warning would soon become reality. Because the next blow to Burkina Faso wouldn't come from a foreign embassy, a distant server, or a shadowy weapons shipment. It would come from someone inside the military command, someone Ibrahim Traoré trusted. The crack in the wall came quietly. On June 2nd of 2024, forensic analysts combing through hard drives seized from West Africa found something odd, a single IP address that had repeatedly accessed Burkina Faso's most sensitive national security systems. It wasn't in Tel Aviv, Paris, or Washington. It was in Ouagadougou, inside the military's own command headquarters. The account belonged to Colonel Karim Doumbia, Deputy Director General of Security, a man Ibrahim Traoré had appointed himself, a man who had stood at his side the day the May 17th raids began. For weeks, Doumbia had been transmitting classified data to an intermediary in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, where it was then forwarded to Tel Aviv. Among the files recovered from his possession, detailed maps of undisclosed lithium deposits, resources worth tens of billions of dollars. The personal shock. When Traoré saw Doumbia's face on the screen during a closed-door meeting, the room was silent. Advisors feared the revelation could shatter public trust. But Traoré made a different calculation in this kind of war. Concealing betrayal was more dangerous than revealing it. On June 4th, he went on national television. "We have found a traitor in our own ranks. The enemy is not only beyond our borders, it can stand right beside us. But we do not fear the truth, for only truth can hold a nation together." That night, special forces surrounded Doumbia's villa. He surrendered without a fight, wearing a faint smile. In his jacket, the USB drive containing the lithium maps. Public reaction. Instead of losing faith, the people rallied. Social media lit up with one phrase: "He does not protect friends. He protects the country." It was the moment the Traoré doctrine crystallized into three uncompromising principles. Absolute transparency. All contracts with foreign powers must be public and accessible. Zero tolerance for covert intelligence operations. Any network discovered will be dismantled, regardless of the cost. Regional cooperation. African nations must share intelligence and act collectively against interference. Why it mattered beyond. Burkina Faso. In Mali, 3 senior officers were arrested for ties to foreign intelligence. In Guinea, a special investigative committee was formed to probe defense officials. The message was clear: sovereignty was no longer about flags and anthems. It was about defending the invisible arteries of the state. This shift echoed moments in U.S. history when the veil was pulled back when Watergate revealed that even the presidency could be corrupted, or when the COINTELPRO files exposed decades of unlawful surveillance. In each case, the shock didn't just target individuals. It rewrote the rules of public trust. The continent takes note. 2 weeks later, 6 West African nations signed the Data Sovereignty Pact, a shared blacklist of companies accused of data exploitation and political interference, many of the names traced back to Tel Aviv. The African Union followed with a resolution supporting collective resistance to covert foreign activity. Western media called it a geopolitical earthquake. In Africa, it was simply the first step of a long walk. Strategic implications for the West. For Tel Aviv, the Doumbia affair was both a failure and a roadmap. If one officer could compromise a nation's defenses, perhaps more could be turned. Netanyahu's advisors openly discussed chiseling from the inside in leaked notes. The problem was, every time they struck Traoré, met it with openness, and that openness only deepened his legitimacy. The long game. Traoré's strategy wasn't just offensive. By embedding the doctrine into education from primary schools to universities, he aimed to make sovereignty a civic instinct. Students would learn how foreign contracts had stolen African gold oil, and now data. They would study the raids of May 17th as a case study in resistance. In one speech to teachers, Traoré said ammunition can run out, but knowledge once given to the people can never be taken away. The real weapon, that's the paradox. Africa news headlines often miss the most dangerous weapon in Traoré's arsenal. Was not the military, it was the public's informed vigilance. A nation that knows exactly how it was betrayed is a nation far harder to betray again. From that point forward, the fight was no longer just between Burkina Faso and a foreign intelligence network. It had become a battle over the political DNA of West Africa, over whether the next generation would inherit dependency or defense. And as Ibrahim Traoré stood in Ouagadougou's National Square before 200,000 people, wearing his worn military jacket and speaking of the road ahead, it was clear this was no longer a solitary leader's war. It was a continent's awakening. In the final moments of his speech, standing before a sea of flags and voices, Ibrahim Traoré let the cheers fade into silence. His eyes swept over the faces, farmer students, soldiers, mothers with children on their shoulders. Do you accept? He asked that your children should grow up in a country where our resources, our information, and our decisions are all controlled by others. The answer thundered back from the crowd. No. He nodded slowly. Then every person here is a soldier. Not all will carry rifles, but each of you can defend this homeland with truth, with vigilance, and by never selling your conscience. This was more than a rally. It was a passing of the torch. Traoré called for the history of resistance to be taught in every school, for the May 17 raids to be remembered not just as a moment of defiance, but as a blueprint for sovereignty. He named the principles again: absolute transparency, zero tolerance for covert operations, regional unity, urging the crowd to carry them forward as living law. Across Africa, news channels' images of that day spread an unbroken human wall. A leader speaking without notes, the flag of Burkina Faso lifted high against the sky. And to those watching from across the ocean, the message was clear. This is not only Africa's fight. It is a reminder to every generation that independence is never given, it is defended daily in ways seen and unseen. If you have ever believed in justice, now is the time to remember why.